All right, so bell ringer for today. Like I said, we're going to have a quiz on Thursday, Google form. It's going to be a short one, so we can maybe move on with notes afterwards. And tomorrow, I'm going to start the other presentation, the other PowerPoint moving forward. So I usually don't like to do that before a quiz, but I'm going to have to just because of timing and everything. I want to make sure I get through the material by the end of the year. So we're going to have our quiz on Thursday, and tomorrow we'll moving in the Eisenhower years into the 1960s. Okay? All right, so bell ringer, describe how culture in America changed during the 1950s after World War II. There we go. All right, so what do we got? Describe how culture in America changed during the 1950s. What do we got? What do you have? Chris, what do you have?
So, during the 1950s, country cheers to economic prosperity of the 1920s. With new homes, rock and roll, sports, vacations, style teams, and more modern lifestyle for most of the average population. It's an outline of the base of our culture.
All right, good. Good job. Good job. So the 1950s, we see almost a reappearance of the 1920s, the roaring 20s, these good times. And a lot of that because, World War II ended, and we see a lot of prosperity. More people coming home, and industries working for peacetime products. No longer is it wartime products, but we see the creation of television, right? In the early 1950s, they said 9% of families had them. Towards the end of the 1950s, 90%. It's a huge jump, a huge change. And it just shows the changing, I guess you say, lifestyle of many of these Americans. A lot of these items were more affordable. the standard of living was a lot higher. Okay, yesterday we talked about Levitt towns. What are Levitt towns? What is a Levitt town? There's one of them right outside of New York City, Chris.
Isn't one of the large certain
Yeah,
populations?
yeah, good job. So this is the creation of suburban areas, suburban style living outside of these urban areas, larger cities, where many of these veterans coming home, they could afford these houses pretty easily, and they're really cheap, and it allowed for many of these people to not have to live in that fast-paced lifestyle in these urban areas in these larger cities. They could live outside of them in a community neighborhood that is obviously a little bit a slower pace of life than what these cities were like, and not as slow as what a rural setting would be. Obviously working in the farms or on the farm. Okay, so suburban living, entertainment. You talked about that. Good job. So sports becoming a big thing in the 1950s, moving into music like rock and roll. We talked about Elvis Presley. Cars, right? So these new models of cars and automobiles, and it looks like there's a reappearance, like I said, of the Roaring Twenties. Okay, it's a different style of living. Were there still conflicts going on in the world though in the 1950s? Andrew, what was going on?
I want to say the Korean.
Yeah, the Korean War. Good job. So the Cold War was, initiated right after World War II. That was happening, and the Cold War right around 1950 to 1953. But American culture was still moving past it. Still changing. Okay, and it wasn't as large of a war, large scale as World War II. And what else was running rampant in the United States, which we're going to talk about today? A reappearance of what? It was a fear could take over the country and topple it. Gail? Communism. Yep, good job. The Red Scare. Good job. The Red Scare. So that's what we're going to talk about today. All right, and we're going to mention a little bit about some issues with segregation and a Supreme Court case that was very significant in trying to solve these issues of segregation in the United States. All right, so 1950s, it's almost like the Roaring Twenties again. Okay, go figure. Right after World War One, Roaring Twenties. After World War II, you see the 1950s, and the standard of living for all Americans seems like it's going in the right direction. Right, making it more affordable for Americans to purchase items and live this luxury style of living. Okay, good. Terms for today, like I said, we have McCarthyism, Brown versus Board of Education, the Hollywood 10, HUAC, and the Rosenbergs. I know there's quite a bit there, but this is it then for this vocab. So how about tomorrow? I'll have it posted up for those of you at home. Please post it up for tomorrow so I can grade it then that night into Thursday when your quiz is. For those of you in here, I'll just come around and check it. Okay? I'll just come around and check it for those of you in here. But everybody at home, please have that posted for Wednesday. All right, I'll let you guys get working here. All of it, most of it, yeah. So like usually when I create the tests, the quiz, the assessments, I just roll down the vocab. That's what I do. Might be multiple choice. It might be matching. Some might be involved with a short answer. I don't know how my tests are set up. Chris, you going to the prom?
Yep.
Yeah?
Mhm.
Who you going with, man?
My girlfriend.
Oh, okay, cool. Cool.
Halifax.
Halifax. All right. Oh, yeah. Early dismissal day for the baseball. Juniata. Good luck, man.
I would be paying.
What's that?
I probably would be paying.
Oh,
Well, that's good.
all right, McCarthyism. What do we have? What do we got here? Cody, what do you got for McCarthyism?
Practice making accusations of subversion of freedom.
All right. Okay. So this was a senator in Wisconsin during the 1950s, right after World War II. And he was pushing for this Red Scare in the United States to a point, like I said, it was like a witch hunt. And it was almost like the Red Scare in the 1920s, very similar, but it was even more polarized now because of media, right? It was on the television, it was on, on radio broadcasts, it was in newspapers, magazines, and McCarthyism was this scare, this threat, and this person, Senator McCarthy, was pushing this in the U.S. to try to round up all these communists and try to get rid of them out of American society. And he actually had a big following for a short period of time. And then after a while, without any evidence of these people actually being communists, he lost some steam, lost some attention there. People kind of just pushed him to the side. But this was a craze in the U.S. And again, just falsely accusing people of being communists. My one history teacher in high school used to walk around, communist, communist. Like, have you ever seen anybody wearing red? Angel, you communist? No. Brown versus Board of Education, 1954. What do we have? What do you got here? Angel, what do you have for this one? Brown versus Board of Education.
Landmark decision of the U.S. Supreme Court in the important U.S. state laws establishing racial segregation in schools were unconstitutional, even if the segregated schools are otherwise equal.
Yeah, good job. Good job. So Brown versus Board of Education. This ended segregation of public schools. Okay. More so, we see this in the South. And a lot of these southern states try to hold on to this separate but equal idea that was set up Plessy versus Ferguson in the late 1800s. But now, finally, in 1954, the United States was ending segregation in public schools, trying to unite them together. And again, if they try to make a divide, even if the resources are the same, even if the school is very similar, or the materials are the same, or educators are very similar, because there's a divide, it makes it seem that there's a division, an unequal treatment against certain people, right? Discrimination. So Brown versus Board of Education, this was ending segregation of public schools, uniting these public schools together. All right, Hollywood 10. What do we have, Kale?
10 is a 1950 American 16-minute short documentary film. The film, each member of Hollywood 10 made a short speech denouncing McCarthyism and Hollywood blacklisting, which was directed by John Baird.
All right, so the Hollywood 10 were people that did not accept questioning about if they were part of a communist party or a communist affiliation. They pleaded the fifth, right? They said, we don't need to comment on this. We don't need to talk about it because this crazy in the United States, it's like, yeah, we don't have to prove that we aren't communists, right? And at that time, it's like, oh, well, if it's a political affiliation, we can have it. We can have this opinion in the United States, in America. And these 10 actors, actresses, whatever, they did not accept questioning by the HUAC and many of these organizations trying to weed out the communists in American society. So what do you think happened to these 10 actors and actresses? Do you think they ever had a job in Hollywood again, making movies? No. Just from them not answering any questions or going to any of these hearings to see if they're communists, they lost their jobs pretty much. They didn't have the ability to go on and and act in many movies or shows or television shows, and they were blacklisted, if that makes sense. You guys know what a blacklist is? It means like these people would never have a job or never have the ability to serve in whatever type of career path they would want. All right, last one here, the Rosenbergs. What do we have? Chris, go ahead.
Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, basically spying, passing secrets, atomic secrets to the Soviets.
Yeah, good job. Good job. So the Rosenbergs were a couple in the U.S. that it was believed they were passing secrets to the Soviet Union about the hydrogen bomb, about these atomic weapons. The United States couldn't believe that the Soviets were creating these new forms of super weapons that fast and that quick right after the United States did. So it just made it seem and appear that there were spies in the Manhattan Project, in the developments of these new nuclear weapons. And the Rosenbergs were found guilty. They're originally sentenced for 40 years in prison so that they could maybe question these two and see maybe if there's more followers of the Soviet Union or communists in the United States. But they were executed by electric chair. Okay, and this really just built on the height of McCarthyism in the U.S. and as fear of communism, the Red Scare, once again, after World War II. There wasn't much evidence to believe that they were spies. Many people believe they were. Many people believe they weren't. Okay, but again, this was just a fear in the U.S., especially the Soviet Union, developing these new super weapons. Who's leaking this information out? How are they gaining this information or material? Oh, big question, right? Okay, so moving on. Here's what we got going on for today. So we're transitioning, we're moving. Right in the middle of the Korean War, we see a new president, President Eisenhower. Okay, we talked about him a little bit already. Famous general during World War II. The United States thought, this is the man in charge. This is the person we should look to help us with this containment of communism, right? To be hard on the Soviet Union. Okay. And what did Eisenhower do with military funding? Did he decrease it, increase it? What did he do? You guys remember? Kale, go ahead. Yeah, why and how? Why did he do that? Okay, all right. So what did he more or less transition to with developments and creations of? What did he transition to? Like, what did you think a new war? If there was ever a war fought, how would it be fought? With what? Yeah, nuclear weapons and ICBMs, right? We talked about ICBMs last week, these intercontinental ballistic missiles, and Eisenhower thought, well, do we need to have a strong, overarching land force? Do we need tanks? Do we need armored vehicles? Do we need, I don't know, the ability to have a strong Navy and Air Force? Yeah, we do. But at the same time, we should maybe focus more of our attention on developing intercontinental ballistic missiles. Maybe we should focus more time on creating these super weapons, right? So we're transitioning from this overarching land force, that we see maybe in World War II and wars before, to developments in the new style of fighting. These ICBMs and these nuclear weapons. Yeah, so we talked about Eisenhower with that. Is he going to follow that policy of containment? Do you think he's going to do that, Cody? Do you think he's going to follow Truman's policy of containment moving forward? Yeah, he will. He will. Yeah, so he wants to try to contain communism still, try to help follow that plan of what the Truman Doctrine established to help support these democratic nations all around the world. If they're trying to fight off communism, even if it's externally or internally, they will be supported by the U.S. All right, so Eisenhower, he's going to have a different look, and he's going to also create the interstate highway system, right? And a lot of that was, because of transportation for people to travel wherever they would want at a fast pace. But if there ever was a war, or if there ever was a nuclear war in many of these major cities, we need to have the ability to evacuate these cities very quick at a fast pace. So that's why these interstate highways were created in the 50s and moving into the 60s. All right, so Brown versus Board of Education, we already talked about that, but it ruled that schools must be racially integrated. So these schools in the South where it was just strictly white or strictly African American, now they're going to be combined together. So ending segregation in public schools, and this was a landmark case, Brown versus Board of Education. Okay, and we'll talk about how this was impactful a little bit more when we get to the civil rights movement. But this really kick-started the civil rights movement in the 1960s. This was the first step, right, to try to push for the end of segregation in public facilities, moving forward even more with the Voting Rights Act in the 1960s. All right, so here's some pictures of the segregation and the desegregation here with with Brown versus Board of Education. In many of these southern states, it wasn't accepted. Many of these southern states wanted to try to keep and hold on to these segregated schools, which they did for a short period of time, until the U.S. actually forced them to desegregate them. And again, the reason for that was many of these schools that were for the African Americans, they didn't have the proper materials. They didn't have the proper infrastructure of the school buildings. Okay, it was a drastic change. It was totally different, and not in all cases, but for the most part, they were. And we believed if there was a separation, that means many of these students, whether they're African Americans or whites, they weren't receiving the same education. They weren't receiving the same, I guess to say, understandings of new concepts and education. So desegregating it was creating an equal playing field for all, an equal opportunity for all. Does that make sense, guys? Okay. All right. Oh, so success in office. Eisenhower, he will win his second term, and Nixon will be his next man in charge as vice president. Okay, we'll talk about him a little bit later with Watergate. It's unfortunate what happens there for him. Minimum wage, which is good for all Americans, right? He's a Republican, so he actually had a lot of Democratic viewpoints as well. Okay, if anything, he was more moderate. He did believe that we need to be tough on the Soviet Union, make sure we expand our military with new advancements in technology like ICBMs and nuclear weapons. But at the same time, we want to try to create a better life for Americans at home. Okay, we want to make sure that we can provide social programs for United States citizens, and raising that minimum wage and increase funding for public housing. Like I said, he created an interstate highway system, a lot of it because if there was a nuclear war, we need the ability to evacuate these larger cities like New York, like Washington, D.C., let's say, or Philadelphia along the East Coast. Okay, we need to make sure we have the developments of these new roadways in case war would ever happen or ensue. Okay, but if there's no alarming threat or if there's no attack on American soil, who else can use those interstate highways? The citizens. We can use that to travel all around. And with that being said, what do you think that would do to the American economy and the culture? Well, we see restaurants being created. We see new forms of entertainment being created alongside of these highways, right? Yeah. So stadiums start appearing, these sports entertainment. We see restaurants. We see different types of developments in businesses, okay, because of this interstate highway. And this really helps with this economic boom in the U.S., okay, the creation of these new types of businesses. All right, created Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. And his popularity soared as he won in 1956. All All right, you guys good with that? So Eisenhower, very successful, like I'll talk a little bit more on the next PowerPoint here, and how he's going to combat against the Soviet Union moving forward. But there were a lot of issues. And like I talked about it at the start of class with the vocab, McCarthyism, this Red Scare, is really going to push many of Americans to be questioned about their patriotism and their strong will to the United States. Even Walt Disney was questioned. I'll attach a video to the announcement and how he was pretty much grilled for 10 minutes straight about his ties to communism and if he knows any communists in the United States. It's pretty interesting. I advise you to watch that video. All right, the Red Scare. This is a pretty cool political cartoon. Cody, what do you think of that political cartoon there? So right there, the iceberg, the red iceberg. These are the countries that fell to communism after World War II: Eastern Germany, North Korea, Poland, Hungary, China, Czechoslovakia. It looks like that iceberg is going to continue to grow, right? We need to make sure that we can try to contain it, make sure we can try to stop it from growing anymore. And like I said, Eisenhower is going to continue that policy. All right, so with the fear of communism in the United States, the HUAC, the House of Un-American Committee, Activity Committee, they were trying to investigate and crack down on communists in the United States. And the U.S. believed that these communists were inside the military, inside, politics, right? In education, and now entertainment, right? Entertainment. So we want to make sure that we could stop this spread of, communist policies and ideas and ideology. The way to do that is create a task force to try to question and weed out these communists from American society. All right, so it first was created to try to weed out any fascists or Nazi supporters in the U.S. Obviously in World War II, that was one of the main concerns. Any Japanese spies. But later, that transitioned to this communist threat, this Red Scare in America. Now communism is the big enemy, the big opposition, and we need to make sure that we can cap it. We can make sure it doesn't spread. All right, so FBI screens federal employees, 3,000 dismissed or quit. So they actually cracked down on 3,000 different people throughout the government, throughout politics. Many of them maybe just quit because they didn't want to deal with the stress, the anxiety of it. It's like, well, they don't have any evidence. They have a huge backing. It is what it is. But 3,000 of them were dismissed by the HUAC. All right, real quick, last two slides here, I think, for most part. Yeah, so the Red Scare, like I mentioned before, the Hollywood 10, they're a group of writers, directors, producers who refused to answer questions to the HUAC. They didn't believe that this was, using any evidence, that this was a just worthy cause, that, obviously that they were just kind of making up stuff as they go. And they didn't have a lot of backing. Eventually, many people saw the silver lining within the HUAC and how, they didn't have too much evidence and how this was just literally a Red Scare, building on the paranoia of many Americans that the U.S. would maybe potentially be taken down by these communist supporters, and these communist spies. So the blacklist created by movie executives, they made sure that these people, the Hollywood 10, that refused to answer any questions by the HUAC of their belief of being a communist, would never have a job again. Because if they did, that might spread their beliefs, their ideology to the rest of Americans and spread communism throughout the United States. All right, guys, good with that? Zerby, good? All right, so the Rosenbergs, sorry guys, just getting through it here. The Rosenbergs, like I mentioned, they were two individuals, a couple that were put to death by electric chair because they thought to be and believed to be spies of the Soviet Union. Again, building on that Red Scare in the United States, building on this fear of communism, supporting the Soviet Union internally to try to break down the U.S. There is a reason why they maybe created these hydrogen bombs, these atomic weapons, these super bombs. And the only way they could do it is if they're stealing information from the U.S. And this actually kind of came out about from Klaus whatever his name is. But he was one of the main conspirators, one of the main people that the U.S. believed spilled the beans of the Manhattan Project to the Soviet Union, where they developed this hydrogen bomb eventually as well. And the Rosenbergs were tied in on it as well. All right, last thing, guys, McCarthyism. So McCarthyism, like I mentioned before, he gained a lot of support in the United States because this Red Scare. He built on the paranoia, built on the fear of communism spreading throughout the U.S., and he claimed over 205 names. He said it was a list of people that he believed and knew that were communists. And again, he didn't really have any evidence. And he ruined the careers and lives of many of Americans because he falsely accused them of being communists. So they were blacklisted and never could have a job in the U.S. ever again. And here's a picture of him and his list. He'd be just going around labeling people communists when there really wasn't too much evidence backing it. All right, see you guys. Have a good one. See you, buddy. Have a good one.
You guys better not make Aaron Rodgers retire.
Oh, who knows?